Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Downloaded Content Podcast. If you're new here, please hit the like, share, and subscribe button. And the best thing to do is go ahead and subscribe to the Downloaded Content newsletter if you haven't done that to get things that are exclusive straight to your inbox. I do apologize. Last week we did not have a podcast because there was a death in the DLC family. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the Wade family. But hopefully Dylan and I will be back next week where we're going to be talking about the profound movie, The Life of Chuck. Normally I do say narrator, fictional character, and author, but today I think I'm Minister Crumpton. And spent the weekend off of social media doing a lot of praying and meditating to kind of compile some things that I really want to get off my chest. And before I really start, I want to read a passage from a Buddhist scripture called the Dhammapada. And it's from the section entitled The Wise. It goes like this. If someone sees an intelligent person who is skillfully able to point out shortcomings and give suitable reproof, let him cherish such a revealer of hidden treasures. Only good can come from such an association. Let the wise one guide, correct, and deter others from what is base and vile. He will be treasured by the good and spurned by the evil. So, I had quite a few calls in the past few weeks, but one in particular that I really want to discuss. Out of the blue, someone who I know, have known for a few years, but I haven't spoken to for about two. We text back and forth. They gave me a call. This is a veteran who I respect very much. And immediately when I saw, their name on the caller ID, I knew that something was up. And so I answered the phone and could tell that they were distraught. They were, like so many of us in this country with eyes to see, very heavy. Yeah, I think that's the appropriate word. And what they had to say to me or inquire of me was, one, to see if they were an island, if they were alone in their observations about the things that are going on in this country. And what they relayed to me, again, this is a veteran who still works within military channels or government channels. So what they were distraught about was the fact that people around them that for years he had called brother or sister in a common mission of defending and upholding the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. He had been witnessing them en masse, agreeing with, facilitating, participating, and generally thinking that it was a good idea to do some of the things that we're seeing in the news, such as, the harassment of the Hispanic community, deportations, concentration camps, things of that nature. It was really weighing heavy on him that his brothers and sisters in arms or people who he worked with within government were advocating for a lot of the things that so much of us are concerned with in this country right now. And he felt like he was losing his mind. Like, is he the only one who can see in his peer group that what we're seeing come down from the commander-in-chief of this great free country, that these things are not only a violation of the supreme law of the land, but they're evil. And I sat with him for a good long while in that heaviness, in that uncomfortable space when you are surrounded by people who are adamant about doing the wrong thing, convinced that they're doing the right thing. Because it's very crazy making, when you're in the right and everyone around you is clearly in the wrong. And so he reached out to me, and it made me feel good to a degree, because he said that though admittedly he had sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, he had admittedly not read it as much as, say, someone like myself. And that if there was anybody who he knew who'd ever handed him a pocket constitution that truly was what he would consider a patriot, it was me. So I was honored that, after such a long period of not actually speaking to this person, that when they're seeing all this treasonous activity around them happen, that they thought of me. Call and see what Daniel thinks. That was very moving. And in this conversation, I let him know, no, you're not crazy. It is something that is quite bewildering. And even the phrase that he used was, it seems like everyone is under a spell. And I agree. I think that as a minister and as someone who has quite the affinity for the King James Bible and the prophecies therein, that is exactly what is going on in our nation, that people are under a spell. They're under a hypnotic trance. And as the Bible does say, during the end times, that if it were possible, even the very elect would be deceived. There would be delusion put over the eyes of the majority, to where, they couldn't see the handwriting on the wall if their nose was against the wall. And I relayed to him that I understood that I wake up every day in this country and am brokenhearted at what I see going on around me. And the justifications for the wrongdoing that are being put out there, that are just so shallow. In my conversation with him, I relayed to him, I said, listen, I don't know what your spiritual background is, but it really doesn't matter, because every spiritual faith talks about a time period where everything's going to collapse, everything's going to come down, the end days, the end times, whatever you want to call it. I have my particular interpretations of prophecies, and you can have yours, and that's fine. But most people agree that there is a period where it all comes crashing down. And I said, it's my belief that that's where we're at, that we're in those days. We're in the last of the last days, where all of the things that you hear about or read about in the book of the Revelation are coming to fruition. And now it doesn't seem so far-fetched that these things can happen and can transpire. And so I said, it's not everybody can see it, and not everybody would agree with me on that, but I'm convinced that we are. And since we are, we each individually have to decide who we are during these times. We have to decide if we are going to be spectators of this great evil and watch, keep going to work, clocking in, doing, the normal everyday things while the world burns and our neighbors and our friends are being black bagged and put in the back of vans and taken to Alligator Alcatraz or God knows where. We're either just going to go along to get along while these things are happening to everybody around us, and then eventually us ourselves, or we have to decide if we're going to participate in all of this great evil. Or we have to make the decision if we're going to speak out about it, do something about it. But each one of us has to decide who we are during these times. And that's, I gave him a few references to go and look up scripturally to see where we're at on the timeline. And told him, unequivocally, as I have said to anybody who would listen to me, that my belief is that the creature that a good majority of Americans put into the highest place of power, if he is not the Antichrist, he is certainly an Antichrist. Um, he's certainly gonna, if he were auditioning for the part of the beast or the little horn, he's given it his all. Let me just put it to you that way. And I know that I'm not alone. There are a lot of people in my community and in spiritual circles who share the belief that he may very well be that wicked one that we have all been warned about, that was coming onto the scene. And by the looks of it, like I said, I'm almost absolutely 100% convinced that it's him at the top of the American food chain, at the top of the hierarchy, if you were. And that can be scary. And it makes sense to me why everything that we see happening from his seat of power is to denigrate, degrade, whittle away, diminish the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Now, people who've ever heard anything that I've ever said, maybe I haven't explained it properly. Maybe I haven't articulated properly why it is that I reverence the Bill of Rights and the Constitution as much as I do. This is why. Some people consider the Bill of Rights to be a political document. Some people believe that it's a contract. Maybe that's correct. You're free to interpret it any way you want to. The way that I look at it is as a devoutly spiritual person who in my life does everything that he can to emulate the life of who we know as of Christ. I look at it as a very condensed logos. When I think of the Bill of Rights, I think about our founding fathers who were not dummies. They most certainly had looked at tyrannical governments prior to them and studied to show themselves approved, workmen that needeth not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And they said, let's look at this one individual, whether you believe he's historical or not, who, according to the story, was sinless, which means innocent, right? He didn't do anything wrong. So when I look at the Bill of Rights, I see, an endeavor to protect the rights of the individual. I see a reversal of what went wrong with the trial of Christ. For example, Christ was subject to a kangaroo court, and he was not judged by his peers. He remained silent. He was taken without warrant, without cause. There was no probable cause to search and seize Christ. And so when I look at the Bill of Rights, that's what I see. I see an attempt to answer the execution of an innocent man. Almost like whenever in the scriptures, Christ was asked, what's the greatest of the commandments? And he took all the law and the prophets and he boiled it down to two commandments. Love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. He condensed it. Well, in my opinion, I think that what the Bill of Rights is an attempted condensation of the trial of Christ. So from my spiritual point of view, taking an oath to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights is a very, very serious thing. It's more serious than I think people realize who do it, which is sad because, every elected official raises their hand and they swear an oath to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, and most of them don't even read it, and that's a sad, sad thing. For example, there is another veteran that I know who recently I spoke with, and they had fought in Vietnam, and they started carrying around a pocket constitution as a result of me handing them one. And I was very happy to hear that they had started to read the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and memorize it. And they swore an oath, back in the days of Vietnam, and went and fought a war for the document. But they were just now getting around to reading it. So, which I think that's the case with a lot of elected officials or anybody who swears the oath. I think that they have an idea what the philosophy of it is: freedom, liberty for everybody. And yes, that's true. But I don't think that most people who swear an oath to the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, reverence it in the way that I reverence it, as if it were a condensation of the trial of Christ. Especially, a lot of people who are evangelical Christians within government or within, any office where that oath was taken. I don't think they look at it that way either. I think they think it's maybe a complicated document that only lawyers can understand. And, so they'll just raise their hand and willy-nilly swear an oath to it and whatever, which is very, very sad. And I think a lot of elected officials, if they were honest and you asked them, hey, when's the last time you actually cracked it open and read it? It would be an embarrassing answer, I'm sure. So, it was good to hear from my veteran friend in that capacity, that he was becoming disheartened, that there's no doubt about it how many people are just violating the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and their oath. It's just very, very obvious now. And you see it everywhere. You see the entire structure of our dead republic's law has been diminished to, whatever modern day scribes and Pharisees say, which is that's your lawyers and your judges, in case you didn't know. And as a result of it being diminished incrementally and now chunk by chunk, we're in the state of affairs that we're in. And after that conversation, I sat in the heaviness for a few days, but every day that I would wake up after this conversation, there's a name that would pop up in my mind when I would rise. And that name is Dietrich Bonhoeffer. You know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer is, class? He was an awesome guy. Look him up. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in short. He was a minister during the time of World War II, during the rise of the Führer. Very spiritual guy. And actually, he was like their version of a podcaster. So he would, preach on the radio and things like that. And one of the things that he preached against was the maniacal idea of an Aryan race, this eugenics-driven philosophy that gave rise to the Third Reich and allowed Adolf Hitler to form the Nazi Party and completely take that country and those people and others into the Second World War. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was very adamantly opposed to this philosophy. And he, before the war broke out, he fled to America because he saw the writing on the wall. And from memory, I think he lasted about 26 days in America. And he wrote back to a relative, and he was so convicted in his heart at what he saw happening that he said, I've made the wrong decision. I would have no right to rebuild a Christian Germany if I did not endure what's going on with my people. And so he got on a ship, and I think it was like the last ship that left before the war officially broke out. And he went back home to Germany to be with his people and to do good where he could during the reign of a madman. And so, a lot of historians say that the miracle with Dietrich Bonhoeffer was that he lived as long as he did, because he was just a very outspoken guy, very critical, of, the Nazi Party from the very beginning. And that was a death sentence in a lot of cases. He when he did get back to Germany, he refused compulsory service. He was like, "No, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to go, fight in your insane war and kill innocent people," which branded him basically a traitor. So that was a death sentence in and of itself. But miraculously enough, I think he had a brother who was in military intelligence and got him a job, away from all of that. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer, throughout the course of World War II, put into practice, not just with words, but with his actions, what he felt Christ would do if Christ were in that situation. And what did that look like? Well, it looked like, helping Jewish people avoid concentration camps. It looked like, smuggling people out of the country. It looked like joining resistance cells of people who were not going to go along with the dictates of a madman and the hierarchy beneath him, going all the way down, from the SS to the Gestapo. So this man of God, this minister, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, violated the law in a lot of different ways in order to put his faith into practice. And so a lot of you may have heard of, Operation Valkyrie. There was a movie, you can rent it on whatever, with Tom Cruise is in the movie, but he was connected to Operation Valkyrie, which was it was a plot of Germans, by Germans, to assassinate the Führer with a suitcase bomb. He was actually connected to that. So, of course, Operation Valkyrie did not go off as planned. Hitler got, a busted eardrum and singed pants when the briefcase was slightly moved away from where it was supposed to be. Well, the Führer was so infuriated after Valkyrie that, he used the Gestapo and their national database to hunt down anybody that they could connect to this assassination plot. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer happened to be one of them. He wasn't a mastermind or anything like that, but he was connected to it. And so Dietrich Bonhoeffer was ultimately arrested. It spent the rest of his life and World War II, in Nazi cages. And there's tons of stuff online that you can look up about Dietrich Bonhoeffer. His writings were absolutely brilliant. If you want to ever be inspired by literature during times of treason and tyranny, where it seems like my friend who called me, everyone around you is participating in the wickedness, I would suggest you look up, the writings of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. But what I wanted to really hover over, because I think that myself and a lot of people who are listening to me and my friend who called me, the veteran friend, I think that what we're all kind of trying to process is what Dietrich Bonhoeffer was really trying to process and wrote extensively about, which is, how is it that you can get a nation of writers, of poets, of artists, of mathematicians, of good people? How do you get an entire nation who had so much potential to follow the hierarchy of a madman and do ungodly things, unthinkable things to other human beings? It really tore at his mind, as it tears at mine. How does that happen? So he had a lot of time to think about this and write about this in Cages. And do you want to know what he came up with? It wasn't evil. It wasn't the devil. It wasn't malice. When he came to his conclusion on how you actually get a nation of people to go along with a madman and do criminal things, ungodly things, he came up with stupidity. Mass stupidity. Now, this is not to say that the Nazis were uneducated or not intellectual. That's not what he meant, because you can be highly intellectual, highly educated, but get caught up in the collective stupidity that Dietrich Bonhoeffer was talking about, right? And let me read a quote from Bonhoeffer that I found. Now, this was letters and papers from prison. Quote, "Stupidity is a more dangerous enemy of the good than malice. One may protest against evil. It can be exposed, and if need be, prevented by use of force. Evil always carries within itself the germ of its own subversion, in that it leaves behind in human beings at least a sense of unease. Against stupidity we are defenseless. Neither protest nor the use of force accomplish anything here. Reasons fall on deaf ears. Facts that contradict one's prejudgment simply need not be believed. In such moments, the stupid person even becomes critical, and when facts are irrefutable, they are just pushed aside as inconsequential, as incidental. In all this, the stupid person, in contrast to the malicious one, is utterly self-satisfied, and being easily irritated becomes dangerous by going on the attack. For that reason, greater caution is called for when dealing with a stupid person than with a malicious one. Never again will we try to persuade the stupid person with reasons, for it is senseless and dangerous." End quote. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Letters and Papers from Prison. Check it out. So, he was of the opinion that, stupidity is worse than evil, because evil people typically know that they're doing evil. Stupid people count what they're doing as virtue and integrity. And I totally feel it. Like, I totally feel what Dietrich Bonhoeffer was talking about right there. Because when you try to point out some of the issues that are going on today in the collective of America, it's very frustrating. It's like beating your head against a wall. People think that the evil that they're participating in, incrementally or even just by a hair, that they're doing something virtuous, or it's or with integrity, when it couldn't be further from the truth, right? Mass stupidity. As a result of World War II, there was a study called the Milgram experiment, which I've spoken about before on a podcast. But the Milgram experiment, look it up, was John Milgram, I think his name was. He wanted to also understand how you can get a nation or a mass of people to do horrific things like the Holocaust. And so look up the Milgram experiment. What he essentially brought in test subjects and had them shock others through a wall to the point of them screaming through the wall because a guy in a lab coat came in and told them to turn it all the way up. And what John Milgram deduced at the end of his experiment is that people will do the most horrific things to other human beings if they are ordered or told to do it by an authority figure, a guy in a lab coat, or a boss, that they are willing to electrocute other human beings to the point of death because they were told to do it by who they perceived to be an authority figure. Look it up. Look up the Milgram experiment. And this is what we're actually seeing in America right now. We're seeing a repeat of history And we're seeing people all down the hierarchy from our modern day Führer all the way down. We're seeing people follow orders because they were told to by their boss. It's very scary. And it's also very heartbreaking to see and to watch people who, you believe to be intellectual or educated following orders to do horrific things, you know. But human nature is human nature, I suppose. The other thing is, I think it was called the Ash experiment, where, in times like this, the Ash experiment was, and I'm just very, very rough, I'm giving you a rough draft of it, where the study had, five actors come in and then one test study, and they would have two lines drawn on a chalkboard, right? And I might have it backwards a little bit, but you'll get the gist of it. And so both lines were identical in length, or I might have that backwards. One line was clearly longer than the other, and all the actors would act like the lines were the same. And of course, the one person who they were actually studying, who wasn't in on the study, would go against their own observations, their own senses, because the majority were saying one thing, and then they would agree. And that was the Ash experiment, I believe, where people will, in the collective of a mob, they will forego what their own eyes, their own ears, their own nose, their own heart is telling them is the truth, because, I don't want to be the oddball out. And so it's very interesting how mass stupidity, collective stupidity, can allow what we're seeing and where we're going, because I don't see any indication that we're not going to be repeating this history as far as what happened with World War II. We're already starting to see it with, the targeting of certain demographics with immigration, and that's just the beginning. And all across this country, politicians and people behind a badge and people who have sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution from enemies, both foreign and domestic, they're just throwing it right out the window. It's pretty heartbreaking. Which brings me to one of the next things that I think is facilitating this. And that's not knowing where you're at on the map. Let me explain. When I was a kid, my mom and dad used to love watching Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. You remember Unsolved Mysteries? I just dated myself. That's fine. And so I love my parents. I was always up underneath their ass. And so when Unsolved Mysteries was on, I was on. And there was one episode, I vaguely remember it, but it was talking about the Bermuda Triangle, right? And why, so many pilots would go missing in the Bermuda Triangle. And essentially it was, there's something funky going on out there that messes with your compass. And so these pilots, they didn't know where they actually were. They, with the compass spinning around and everything, they assumed through the fog that if they turned, they were actually like in the Gulf, and if they kept going east, they would hit the Florida airstrip and see land, and they could land. But because their compass was off and they didn't know where they were on the globe, they were actually going farther and farther out into the Atlantic until their fuel ran out, and then kerplunk, they went missing. So I think that that's another thing that is causing this mass repetition of history, is most people caught up in collective stupidity, they really don't know where they're at on the map. And to kind of bring it home a little bit, let me illustrate what I'm talking about for you with this political chart that Archer the Space Noodle had done up for me. So this is an accurate political scale, and we know that it's accurate because Archer the Space Noodle put it together. And by the way, if you're not watching me and you're just listening to the podcast on Spotify or whatever, and you want a copy of this, just go to downloadedcontent.com, subscribe to my newsletter, and after you get your welcome email, just hit apply and say, hey, can you send that incredibly cute political scale, which is also accurate, and I'll be happy to do so. But let's take a look at it for a minute, and you'll see that obviously this political scale is not what you were indoctrinated to believe in and imbibe in your government school. Um, However, every person that I have shown this scale to so far, after examining it, they go, "Yeah, it's pretty accurate." I think it's accurate. So on the far left over here, you have the state, and the way I like to think of the state is basically a dead body, a corpse, a corporation, a beast, right? The state. It has no individual soul. It's not really concerned with the rights of the individual or protecting them. It's all about the good of the body of the zombie, right? And of course, for all of my spiritual listeners, you know that where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty or freedom, which is over here on the scale on the far right. Okay. So, I think that this is a pretty good representation of accuracy in America. And so, most people identify as either left or right. I'm either far left or I'm far right. This binary, um, polarized paradigm of thinking about, how government works. And to tell you the truth, most people who have gotten our country into the state of affairs are right in here. They're, either on the left with the Democrats or on the right with the Republicans. And you can kind of see in here between the brackets of Democrats, you have communism is the farthest to the state zombie corpse that you can get. And then a little step behind that is fascism. And then, of course, a little bit before that is socialism. And you got liberals in there, within the Democrat bracket. Of course, you got your rhino Republicans. They're just Republican in name only. They're right there, doing the tug of war as close to the pit as they can. And then you have things like the Tea Party. And then there's the center line, right, on the way to freedom. Now, as you can see on this chart, the center line of freedom to the left of it is most everybody that you know. Okay. And they are, lacking the same ability to know where they're at, like those pilots in the Bermuda Triangle, because they think that their left-right paradigm or Democrat-Republican paradigm is the entirety of the scale, when in all actuality, it's a trick. It's a trap, as General Akbar would say. And they're on the left side of the scale in regards to freedom and the opposite of freedom. And that's the tug of war that is happening and has happened all of my life, that most people have, through collective stupidity, bought into. That is the entirety of the paradigm. And of course, we see where it goes. It's any push or exhortation of energy, real energy in any of these areas, is only going to get you to the opposite of freedom and liberty, or as far away from the Spirit of the Lord as you could possibly get, right? To a dead state. And then, of course, on the right side of center, you have conservatives, people who want to conserve the fundamentals of our nation, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Now, look, I know that that's not the definition of conservative in today's nomenclature. That's not how people who call themselves conservative think about themselves, but again, we live in an Orwellian society where, words, the meaning of words are changed all the time, which means mind control. You change the meaning of words and you can change a culture. And then a little past conservative going towards freedom is libertarian. And then, somewhere after that, you have anarcho-capitalism. And then, of course, the closest that you can get to freedom, or the spirit of the Lord is anarchy, right? And that's as close as you can get to freedom. We've never really seen what a true anarchist society would look like on planet Earth. And anarchy isn't what most people think. They think of Molotov cocktails and, burning things down, and that's a psyop. That's propaganda. That's not what anarchy is. But I'm not going to do your research for you. You can look it up yourself. But anarchy is the closest to freedom that you can get. And so, like I said, most people don't know where they're at on the map. And, but the funny thing is that they're always carrying the flag of freedom and equality and all of that good stuff, but it's going in the other way. And so, a lot of people that I have spoken to here recently about the state of affairs, they agree that the worst thing that this country could have ever done was accept this two-party system bullshit that's been shoved down our throats. But here we are, right? And like Bonhoeffer said, those paradigms are filled with educated and intellectual people, right? And they're absolutely convinced that they're doing something virtuous, and the direction that they've taken us in is, towards equality and all that good stuff. And you can't reason with them, so don't even try. It's it's like Christ said, don't throw your pearls before swine, lest they turn and rend you, and buddy, they will. So anywho, but I know you guys who have been long-time subscribers of mine, you already know this stuff. But for bonus points, Timmy, in the back, where do you think yours truly is on this scale? The other thing about this scale I think would be quite useful for those of you who are, adamant about having some kind of freedom is, whenever you're being solicited by political candidates in whatever, you should show them this and just ask them to point out where they fall on this scale. Just point your finger, where are you at? And I'm pretty sure that most all of them are going to be on the left side of center, going towards the zombie beast system, right? I mean, it is what it is. But yeah, the divide and conquer thing has brought us to where we're at, where now, people who have sworn an oath to the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and the philosophy of, equality for everyone are participating in, well, some Nazi stuff. I mean, and I want to make a point about that. When we hear about Nazis, we think, the guys in the stormtrooper outfits and with the SS on their collar, but no, Nazis were everyone who participated with the agenda of a maniacal dictator who believed in eugenics and doing horrible things like, compiling national databases and setting up concentration camps and creating secret police and policing the people with the military and all kinds of stuff like that. So it was everybody who participated and facilitated, from librarians who supported it to, your local beat cop to the baker, down the street or whatever. They were all Nazis, right? They weren't, the Nazis weren't just the people who, threw the Jews in the furnaces and everything. It was every member of the functioning society of Nazi Germany was a cog in the machine of the Nazi Party, right? And so, and a lot of them, I guess, they thought they were very well-meaning people, and they would get up every day and, just do their job and put on their uniform or go to their place of facilitating Holocaust, and they would do it and they kind of put blinders on and go, it's for the good of the state. When we're all good, then we're good. And so, yeah, so that's where we're at right now in America, is you have from the top of the hierarchy all the way down to your local areas, you have the facilitation of the dictates of a tyrannical madman who has no qualms whatsoever about putting human beings in concentration camps and laughing about it, naming, you know, torture farms, alligator Alcatraz, and you have the masses, a lot of the masses, just celebrating this, like we live in, you know, the fall of Rome and the gladiators bashing each other's heads in, this bread and circus type of thing, that people are actually endorsing and supporting and doing mental gymnastics to justify as righteous. And we have it happening today, little by little, as Radiohead would say. So, like I said, take a look at that and understand that most people don't know where they're at on the map. And I look at it and I go, you know, like my friend who called me, I'm like, well, this is a part of the spell. This is a part of the trance. This is a part of the hypnosis that the masses are under. That this paradigm is the only paradigm, and all the energy has been focused there. All of the intention has been focused there. And they play pretend that, you know, because politics is theater. It's all theater, ladies and gentlemen. They play pretend that they're doing something for the good, when in all actuality, the friction is just generating energy towards the state, right? And not towards the Spirit of the Lord, where there is freedom and liberty. And a major part of it is the divide and conquer. You know, the divide and conquer of, we're going to label you this Democrat, leftist, liberal, and we're going to label you this Republican, conservative, MAGA, and then pit them against one another, when in the bigger picture, you know, they're not really paying attention to what's going on. They're just caught up in the collective stupidity. So divide and conquer into different titles or egoic structures or whatever has always been the way you can convince a society to do horrible things, just like in Nazi Germany, right? And, you know, to me, it's kind of obvious. You'd think that it would be obvious to, you know, intellectual, well-educated people, but it's not, okay? The scales are over the eyes of most everyone that you know, coming all the way down to your local level.
You've just heard part 1 of Bonhoeffer and a mayoral race on the Jones Plantation. To hear how the sermon ends, click the link below. Visit downloadedcontent.com to watch part 2. While you're there, subscribe to the Downloaded Content newsletter for updates, exclusive content, and future sermons. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Spotify, YouTube, and every platform where free minds still speak truth. The sermon continues, and the story isn't over.